A challenge that I saw many throughout the Pokemon community try to do prior to the launch of Sword and Shield was trying to see what the best possible scenario would be for the games if half the Pokemon would be removed, which is what ended up happening. But today I'm changing the subject matter. What would the character roster of Smash Ultimate look like without half of its characters? This is a possibility that had me intrigued right from the start. We all praise the character roster of this game for having so many fan favorites with incredibly interesting movesets to use. The ability to have a character that's just suited for absolutely everyone is something very special, and it's something that few series manage to pull off perfectly. So let's change that. Today we're taking the 80 character roster of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and chopping it straight in half. This 80 character amount includes all Ekko Fighters, DLC, counts the Miis as 3 separate fighters, and the Pokemon Trainer as 1. I'm using 2 very basic criteria for deciding if a character should stay or not. The character's legacy and popularity, as well as how unique and interesting their moveset is. Sakurai says the #1 factor for including a new fighter is if they are fun to play or not. But that is incredibly subjective. How fun a character is can be different to everyone as it relies on preferred playstyle and several other factors. The argument can be made for every single character in the game that they're fun, except Yoshi. The arguments of legacy and popularity as well as moveset uniqueness are much more objective in comparison, but both can definitely still contain personal biases and opinions. Some of the decisions here were really difficult for me to make, but when you go from 80 to 40, that's to be expected. With all of this being said, I think it's time we get started. What would the Smash Ultimate roster look like if half of the characters suddenly vanished into thin air? The first characters who undoubtedly must be removed first for a shortened Smash Bros. Roster are the Ekko Fighters. I thought it was an interesting idea to brand the clones in a way that you could separate them from the rest of the cast of characters, and it allowed Nintendo to add more representatives that people wanted to see without as much effort being put into moveset design. Despite this, Ekkos have to go for the common reasoning that they don't innovate very much from the fighter that they're based on, so the uniqueness that they provide to the roster is slim to none. I'll briefly go over each Ekko Fighter individually to expand on these reasons. First off, we have Lucina, who gets cut because she barely changes from Marth, who is the mascot of the franchise. And we also already have the protagonist from Fire Emblem Awakening as a representative for that game. Because of that, she's unnecessary. Chrom gets eliminated for similar reasons. While his moveset is slightly more unique because he mainly draws from Roy, but also a little bit from Ike, it's still not entirely unique, and we already have a Great Awakening representative in Robin. The next cut is Daisy, who is very similar to Peach, which makes her a pretty unnecessary Mario character to have in the game. Compared to most of the others, she doesn't play as big of a role in the series, being mainly reserved to spin-off roles outside of the Mario Land games, where she has a bigger role. That still can't save her, however. Dark Pit is very similar to Pit, and considering that Kid Icarus isn't the most popular Nintendo series out there, if you want to call it that, then he would have to go. There's not too much that goes into that decision. Dark Samus was a fun addition to increase the Metroid representation in the roster, but because of similarities to Samus's moveset, she just has to go. Richter is very similar to Simon, and I don't think we really need more than one Castlevania rep in a smaller roster, with their movesets being this way. Ken's reasoning is very similar to Richter because of the moveset similarities to Ryu, and we don't really need another Street Fighter rep with 40 characters. With this first set of cuts, we are now officially down to 73 characters. Getting away from the official Ekko Fighters tag and moving on to some characters that may not be explicitly listed in that vein, but are pretty close. These are semi and pseudo clones, which all provide similarities between characters' movesets that Nintendo doesn't really want to come out and claim that they're Ekko Fighters. Some are more similar than others, but the fact is that most of these characters are gonna have to go because, as previously mentioned, one of the biggest factors of importance here is moveset uniqueness. First up is Dr. Mario, who's a fun character included to represent his little series of games, and he's been getting a little bit of recent buzz because of his mobile game, but overall he isn't needed in a smaller roster. Pichu isn't needed when we have Pikachu with an extremely similar moveset already included as the mascot of the Pokemon franchise. We can't have both, and that means that Pichu just has to go. Young Link was previously somewhat considered to be a full-on clone of Link, and while some new differences have been added in Ultimate to differentiate them, their movesets do remain very similar to one another. Toon Link is a similar situation, unique in some ways and promotes the top-down Zelda games as well as Wind Waker's style, but he's still gonna have to go. If I had the choice to keep one of these two, I'd keep Toon Link because I feel he's more aesthetically unique than Young Link, but in the end we can't keep either one of them in. Isabelle has many differences from Villager, but overall as a semi-clone and in a small roster, 2 similar Animal Crossing reps isn't that necessary. It's a pretty popular series, but Isabelle is only from the newer entries and we can't afford to keep her in because of this similar moveset. Lucas is from Mother 3, which is a great game if you play it through a fan translation because Nintendo has yet to make an official localization, which severely diminishes his popularity, especially over here. He's similar to Ness in many ways as well, which is why he just has to go. Falco and Wolf are both different from Fox in some ways, and while I really wanted to keep 2 Star Fox characters in, it just doesn't seem that feasible in a roster of 40. Especially with the Star Fox series not being very popular right now, and the characters aren't that unique from one another. If I were to keep one, it would probably be Falco, as much as I love Wolf, but unfortunately they both have to go. Up next is Roy, who's slightly similar to Marth, but not overly. I'd hate to remove him, but there are still many Fire Emblem characters in the roster that are more unique to represent the series, which is why he has to go because of the smaller roster size. Now when talking about Ganondorf, he used to be a pretty much full-on Captain Falcon clone, but now even though they've been changed up more from one another, they're still pretty similar. Rather than removing Ganon though, Captain Falcon is my choice to be removed here. I know that the decision to remove a fan favorite is one that some of you may not be happy with, and it kinda seems counterintuitive to remove the character who the semi-clone is based on, but I think Ganon is significantly more important to Nintendo's legacy than Captain Falcon is. The Zelda series is thriving right now, whereas the F-Zero series has been dormant for over 15 years. Ganon provides a villain to the roster and a Zelda character, of which there are a few, with 2 of the 3 links already being eliminated. For these reasons, Captain Falcon has to go. And with all these unfortunate moves so far combined, we are officially down to 63 characters. This section is going to be short, but I've got to mention the Miis in this spot. It's fun to be given an opportunity to customize movesets for a character and effectively put whoever you want into the game, but the fact of the matter is that the possibilities for movesets are relatively limited, and this means that it's not justifiable to keep all 3 Miis in the game. My proposal would be to combine the possibilities for 3 different Mii fighter types into 1 fighter, which would eliminate 2 roster spots, but if you want to take this roster purely based on what the character is with no changes, then the one I would keep is probably the Gunner. I wanted to keep 1 to give players the option if they really want it, but 2 of them have to go. With the removal of Mii Brawler and Mii Swords Fighter, or the idea of combining all 3 into 1 slot, whichever you prefer, we are now down to 61 characters. Now that some of the more obvious cuts are out of the way and things are getting a little bit more difficult to determine who should stay and who should go, I think it's time to look at the large amount of characters that we have left and determine who obviously needs to stay so that we could get a better perspective on contenders for elimination. With 21 more to eliminate, this is going to get more and more difficult. Mario, Donkey Kong, Link, Samus, Yoshi, Fox, and Pikachu are all icons to various Nintendo series, and considering the magnitude of the series that they represent, all of them are obviously safe. Luigi is also safe. I could have potentially put him in the semi-clone section, but over the years he's distanced himself a lot from his brother in terms of their Smash Bros. Moveset, to the point now where they're not that identical. Luigi also serves another purpose, and it's that he's still likely more recognizable and important to video game history than 90% of the Smash Bros. Roster. He stays automatically. Zelda and Ganon will also be staying for the Legend of Zelda series. I don't see any reason for why you should cut them considering how important they are, especially with how unique Zelda's moveset is, and Ganon's is somewhat unique now that Captain Falcon is cut. Bowser and Peach are vitally important to the Mario series and they stay for the same reasons. Their movesets are also pretty interesting. The next automatic stay is Marth, the mascot of the Fire Emblem series, which is now one of Nintendo's biggest. Robin stays as well, considering that Awakening is the most important Fire Emblem game to the series' revival. He has a unique moveset, and is probably the most popular Fire Emblem character to a modern audience. The remaining automatics are Sonic, Villager, Mega Man, Pac-Man, and Ryu. These are all mascots from insanely popular series, like insanely popular, all with a fascinating history with Nintendo and unique movesets. After all of these characters have been classified as untouchable, we are left with 42 characters that have fates undetermined. All of these characters could potentially get cut, and I don't think it will be a ruination of the Smash Bros. Series. We'll survive. But I would love to keep all of them. Unfortunately, half of what remains, 21 characters, must go. We're going to find out who those are going to be. I think a good way to start would be going series by series. The Mario series in the Smash Ultimate roster has 11 characters, not even including the Donkey Kong ones, which I classify as their own separate series, so when dividing the roster in half, we can't have 5.5 fighters, so I will be rounding up in this case, purely because of how important Mario is, and the various sub-franchises that it contains. With Mario, Yoshi, Luigi, Bowser, and Peach all being safe, and Dr. Mario already being cut, we are left with 4 characters to determine who to save from. These are Wario, Rosalina and Luma, Bowser Jr., and Piranha Plants. I'd like to keep one of these because they're all very important in many ways and have unique movesets. Wario is my choice to keep in this case, and it's mainly because of how many Wario games there are. The movesets are all unique and interesting, but when it comes down to the tiebreaker, none of the other 3 could really compete with Wario's importance to the video game industry and popularity. This unfortunately means that Rosalina, Bowser Jr., and Piranha Plants will all not be in our 40 character roster. Now we are left with 18 more to to remove. Moving on to the franchise with the second most representation in Smash, the highest grossing media franchise in the world, Pokemon. So far, Pikachu is the only safe one, with Pichu already being eliminated. There are 8 Pokemon fighters in Smash, since we're counting Pokemon Trainer as 1 fighter for this video, so cutting that in half for the same distribution would leave us with 4. The remaining ones to choose from are Jigglypuff, Mewtwo, Pokemon Trainer, Lucario, Greninja, and Incineroar. I think an obvious one to keep here is Pokemon Trainer, especially since it's 3 characters in one. And Charizard is also one of the biggest mascots of the franchise. Another character who is a fan favorite from Gen 1 that we're keeping is Mewtwo. The most highly requested character going into Smash 4 wasn't a newcomer, but it was a previously cut character being Mewtwo. He's really popular and gives us an opportunity to include a legendary in the mix, and is somewhat of an antagonist for the cast of Pokemon characters, a role that isn't really filled by any other Pokemon in the game. Looking at the 4 remaining, I'd really like to pull one from a more modern generation as to not have an entirely Gen 1 cast and to promote some newer stuff. This is also something that I think would be more likely for Nintendo to do. That means that Jigglypuff would have to go, and between Lucario, Greninja, and Incineroar, Greninja is the obvious choice. He's consistently winning polls as the most popular Pokemon right now, and removing this character would take away a massive mascot of the series from joining Smash. This means that with Lucario and Incineroar also being eliminated and unfortunately joining the cast of cut characters from the roster, 15 more characters need to be removed. The Legend of Zelda series is another really popular one, and they have 6 representatives, which I will unfortunately be cutting in half. Link, Zelda, Sheik, and Ganon are the only ones left, and I think you know where this is going. Sheik, unfortunately, needs to be removed. While part of a great twist in Ocarina of Time, Sheik doesn't have too much relevance to the series outside of that. You could ideally link Sheik and Zelda together again, but if you don't want to play by those rules, then she'll just have to go. 14 characters are yet to be eliminated. Now, Fire Emblem is a tough beast to tackle. Many feel that it's a franchise that's overrepresented. They don't like that it has more characters than Zelda and is technically tied with Pokemon with 8 fighters. I love Fire Emblem as much as the next guy, but I think that since they have a ton of reps and Mario kinda took an extra one, we won't be going in half with 4, and will instead be going down to 3. With Marth and Robin being safe and Lucina, Chrom, and Roy already being cut, who between Ike, Corrin, and Byleth will remain in the roster? And I think the answer we have to go with here is Byleth. Ike doesn't do too much outside of being a powerful swordsman, Corrin is from a fairly controversial entry in the series, and the moveset doesn't exactly blow you away with uniqueness, and that just simply leaves us with Byleth, the most unique moveset out of these 3, and also the one from the most modern and successful entry in the Fire Emblem series. 12 characters are now left to go, the same amount as in the original roster. Kinda says a lot about how far the series has come, really. Let's take a moment now to remove a couple of characters that I don't think are as popular at this point in time and have movesets that aren't vital to stay in Smash. Wii Fit Trainer is an example of a character who fits this criteria, and while there are many unique and interesting aspects to Terry Bogard, I believe he could be cut as well without too much of an impact. Rob and Duck Hunt, again, are characters who are interesting and have some history, but it's just not enough to pull them into the safe category. They're to be cut as well. Little Mac has a storied history, and if he was really innovative, he could potentially stay, but unfortunately that's not the case. Ice Climbers are kind of in the opposite situation. They're pretty unique by having 2 fighters, but they're not very important historically at all. So 6 more remain. Getting back to a few series here, when discussing the Donkey Kong series, there are 3 characters in Smash, and so far none have been cut. That can't fly. We're between Diddy Kong and K. Rool here, and I'm actually going to keep Diddy in this case. We're going to end up having enough heavy villains in this roster, and Diddy can work in conjunction with DK as a nice contrast of a heavyweight and a lightweight. King K. Rool will unfortunately have to be removed in this case. Metroid is the next franchise here, and so far they have 3 characters left as well. They started with 4, so I'm cutting it in half, and I think that's fair. We're between Zero Suit Samus and Ridley to cut, and yeah, I'm keeping Ridley in this case. Zero Suit could just be combined with Samus, but if you don't see that as realistic to happen now, then we could just have Samus and the fan favorite Ridley as our Metroid representation, and I think we'd still be fine. Only 4 more characters are left to be cut. The Kid Icarus and Kirby series combined had 6 characters to start, and I think cutting that collectively in half between those 2 franchises would be fair. I'll give Kirby the extra representative because of the legacy it has had over the years. This means that Palutena will unfortunately have to be cut to leave the Kid Icarus series with 1 character being Pit, and Kirby would need 1 representative cut as well. This leaves us with the decision between Meta Knight and King Dedede. The amount of very heavy characters in the roster is 7 to 8 depending on the weight class you want to use, so I think cutting that in half should leave us with around 4, We only have 3 right now, and I think that keeping DDD would make sense to give us our 4th. DDD is also the much more iconic villain to the Kirby series. With those characters being cut, we only need 2 more to go. These are the ones where it really gets to be the most difficult. Like I said, the further we go into the video, the harder it's getting, but let me stress this situation a little bit here. There are many characters remaining who are the sole representatives of their series, and we've already cut some that meet that criteria, like Little Mac for example. Those are the really unfortunate cuts because all representation of that series from a playable perspective is now no longer in the game at all. When you take a character like Rob and say he's old, you can just cut him. You're taking away his entire legacy, which is why the decision has to be made about more than that. He needs some retro characters too, which is why Ness and Game & Watch will be sticking around. Out of all the retro characters, they have some pretty important histories between them, and their movesets are both incredibly fun and unique. With those 2 characters safe, we're now reducing the number of characters we have to work with, and when you get to a situation this difficult, the math component really needs to come into play, because my emotional attachment to certain characters may lead us from the goal, which would be an objective decision. We have a lot of third parties left, and that can't fly. 13 third party characters means that in theory 6 to 7 should go, but these are usually some of the most iconic characters and have some of the most unique movesets, so we may not need to cut that many. Bayonetta isn't even included in this bunch of 13 because her games are pretty much Nintendo exclusives at this point, although she is technically a non-Nintendo character. Richter, Ken, and Terry have already been cut, and with Sonic, Pac-Man, Mega Man, and Ryu marked as safe, here is what we're left to work with. Snake, Cloud, Simon, Joker, Hero, and Banjo are left, all up for elimination. Someone needs to go, and it's a very difficult decision. And I think that if we're going to pick a first to go, it would be Banjo. The moveset of Banjo and Kazooie is kind of interesting, but not to a massive degree. And I definitely think Banjo is a very important part of gaming history, but it's probably not essential to a roster of 40. Now for the next one, I really didn't want to cut Joker because his moveset is pretty unique, but here's the dilemma. I could get Simon, who also has an interesting moveset, albeit not as much in my opinion, Castlevania started with 2 representatives rather than 1. It would be that much more of a blow to that series to cut multiple representatives, and it doesn't make that much sense to me when cutting the roster in half. Castlevania over the years has also accrued double the amount of sales as Persona, but Persona is the more popular series modernly. Cloud and Hero are both from massively popular series, especially in Japan, and have very fun and unique movesets. And Snake plays very different from most of the other characters in the game, and again, is from a very popular series. For all of these reasons, cutting another third-party character doesn't seem that feasible to me. The remaining characters in contention are all solo representatives from their series. Inkling, Olimar, Shulk, and Bayonetta. I think we can mark Inkling as safe right away. Olimar is incredibly unique, being able to spawn his Pikmin from the ground, something unlike any other fighter out there. Shulk is a similar case, changing his strengths based on the Monado art that he's choosing to use. Bayonetta has some unique components as well, such as Witch Time for example. So how do we decide? When looking at sales, none really blow things out of the water, with the Xenoblade series seeming to show the most potential modernly, with Monolith Soft putting out new game after new game after new game. Xenoblade was also going to be getting a new rep for Smash Ultimate, but it wasn't included due to time constraints. And for these reasons, Shulk is safe. Going back to what I was saying earlier about Bayonetta not being exactly a Nintendo character, and how the ratio of non-Nintendo characters in this shortened roster isn't fully accurate yet, this is why I'm leaning towards keeping Olimar here. Pikmin has higher series sales as well, which isn't the biggest factor in this case, because we're dealing with some relatively smaller numbers here, but it is something. I get that Bayonetta won the Smash Fighter ballot, meaning there's definitely many people who wanted her in the game, but there have also been many other fan favorites removed so far as well. And her ballot win did seem kinda sketchy to say the least. With all of this being said, here is the roster with the characters removed. It may not be ideal to remove half the roster because of just how many fan favorites there are, but one thing I think we've learned from this situation is that if there indeed needs to be some cuts going forward, that if they were to take the roster down to 63, which is where we're at with all of the Echoes and semi-clones eliminated, I think most people would be okay with that. Okay, maybe 64 because of Captain Falcon. But some smaller cuts like this may be something that we're realistically going to be dealing with in the future. I think that despite these removals, Smash Ultimate could still have a really good roster. It just goes to show how deep it is with all of the popularity, fun series, and unique movesets that are being represented. If you're not happy with some of the choices, I totally get it. We sometimes find ourselves attached to our favorite fighters, which is fine, but if that's the case for you, let me know what your decisions would be instead in the comment section down below. It's certainly not an ideal scenario to remove a bunch of characters like this, but I thought it would be fun to see what kind of roster we could still build in this type of a challenge. Thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing to the channel if you want to see more content like this in the future, or becoming a channel member if you want to go to the next level. Other Smash Brothers videos that I think you'll enjoy are linked for you on the screen right now, and I'll see you next time.